What if I told you that one of the most bizarre, bone-chilling crimes in recent history was cracked in less than 24 hours, and the truth behind it is more twisted than anyone could have imagined? Imagine this. It's a peaceful morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people smile at each other over white picket fences, where kids ride bikes after school and dogs bark at squirrels. And then suddenly, the unthinkable happens. A single phone call to 911 sets off a chain reaction that will shatter lives, expose dark secrets, and grip an entire community in fear. Within hours, local detectives were thrown into a case that seemed too clean, too easy, until it wasn't. What appeared to be a tragic accident turned into something far more sinister. And the person they least suspected? Yeah, they were hiding everything in plain sight. You're going to want to pay close attention, because by the end of this video, the answer you came looking for will be staring you right in the face. Hey you. Yes, you, the one watching right now. I know why you're here. You want to understand how someone can commit a crime so disturbing, so calculated, and almost get away with it until the truth cracked open like a grenade. And that's exactly what you're going to get. I promise, I'm not going to waste your time with fluff or filler. Every detail you're about to hear matters. I'm going to walk you through every chilling twist and psychological turn of this real-life case like you're right there with the detectives. This isn't just a story. It's a descent into the mind of someone who truly believed they were smarter than the law. But they made one mistake.
One.
And it's that mistake that blew the case wide open in under 24 hours. So don't even think about clicking away. This isn't one of those stories that drags on forever before delivering the good part. We're already in it. The countdown has started, and by the end, you'll know exactly what went wrong and how fast justice moved when the pieces fell into place. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who just gave you the creeps? You can't put your finger on it. Maybe it's their eyes, maybe it's the way they smile too wide, or how their charm feels like it's covering something rotten underneath. That's exactly the kind of person we're dealing with here. On the outside, they were the picture of normalcy. Clean-cut, polite, always helpful. But behind closed doors, there was something lurking, something off. And as you'll see, it took a very specific set of circumstances and one incredibly sharp detective to pull the mask off and reveal what was really going on. And here's the wild part. This case didn't take weeks or months to solve. No endless interviews. No dramatic standoffs. It was solved in less than a single day. That's not just rare. It's unheard of. And the way they did it? Let's just say, it'll give you chills. As the story unfolds, you'll meet the people involved. The victim, the suspect, the friends who thought they knew everything, and the law enforcement team that wouldn't rest until they found the truth. You'll hear how a neighbor's intuition turned out to be the first domino, how digital forensics played a key role, and how one piece of seemingly useless information became the cornerstone of the entire case. But we're not just going to look at what happened, we're going to look at why. What pushes a person over the edge? What kind of psychological storm brews beneath a calm exterior until it explodes into something lethal? This case will force you to question everything you think you know about guilt, innocence, and how evil can hide in the most unexpected places. And don't worry, there's no confusing jargon or overcomplicated analysis here. I'm talking to you like a friend, like someone who's just as fascinated and disturbed by these true crime stories as you are. We're in this together, and every moment we uncover brings us closer to the truth you came here to find. I know your time is valuable, and I want to respect that. That's why this video is designed to grip you from start to finish, with no unnecessary detours. Because the truth? It doesn't need dressing up. It's already more twisted, more disturbing, and more unbelievable than any fiction. This is real. Real lives, real consequences, real evil. And the way it all came crashing down, fast, brutal, and completely unexpected, will stay with you long after the video ends. So stick with me, because if you think the opening is intense, wait until you hear what really happened behind closed doors, and how one wrong move turned a seemingly perfect plan into a disaster that unraveled at lightning speed. And the best part? You're going to see it all, the clues, the lies, the unraveling. But before we dive into the full case, I want you to imagine this final image, A detective, eyes heavy from no sleep, staring at a grainy piece of footage on a cracked screen. At first, it looks like nothing. Just static, background noise. But then there it is. A single movement. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. And just like that, everything changes. That's when they knew. That's when the truth finally punched through the lies. And what they found next, well, that part you'll have to see for yourself. Stick around, because what happens next will blow your mind. Just 24 hours before the truth exploded into the public eye, the main character of our story, let's call him Daniel, was living what most people would call a perfectly normal life. He wasn't famous. He didn't have a criminal record. There were no glaring red flags that screamed danger to anyone who knew him. In fact, if you asked his neighbors, coworkers, or even his own family, they'd tell you Daniel was just another face in the crowd, a mild-mannered IT consultant with a steady job, a tidy little apartment, and a reputation for being quiet but reliable. He kept to himself, mostly. But when he did speak, he always came off as polite, even friendly in that soft-spoken way that makes people feel at ease. Nothing about him said suspect. Nothing about him made anyone think he was capable of anything sinister. But behind the clean-cut image and predictable routine, there were shadows that no one saw. And it's those shadows we need to step into now. In the weeks leading up to the crime, Daniel's life had started to shift in subtle ways. He'd recently ended a long-term relationship with a woman named Emily, a breakup that, on the surface, seemed mutual. They posted a friendly announcement on social media, claiming they were parting ways on good terms, still friends, and wishing each other the best. But anyone who's lived long enough knows that words like that often hide the real story. And in Daniel and Emily's case, there was more than a little tension simmering under the surface. Close friends noticed Daniel becoming withdrawn. He started missing work, calling in sick more often than usual, and when he did show up, he was distracted, zoning out during meetings, forgetting small tasks, snapping at coworkers over nothing. And yet, when anyone asked if he was okay, he brushed it off with a tired smile and said he was just dealing with a few things. No one pressed him. No one suspected anything worse. After all, heartbreak messes people up, right? It's normal. But things got weirder. One of Emily's neighbors swore they saw Daniel parked across the street from her place late at night, just sitting in his car with the engine off. Another time, he just shrugged and said, "Just thinking." But what chilled her later was realizing the footage he was watching was from 3 days earlier. Not live. Not normal. And when the investigators came knocking, Layla was quick to mention that Daniel had asked odd questions about the building's security protocols, not in a technical sense, but in a way that felt personal. Targeted. Still, for every strange behavior, there was always a perfectly reasonable explanation. Whatever the truth was, their friendship had turned toxic, and Brian wasn't exactly rushing to defend Daniel once everything started unraveling. In fact, he told the police he wouldn't be surprised if Daniel snapped. Then there was the coworker, Layla. She was the kind of person who notices things, keeps mental notes, and isn't afraid to speak up when something doesn't sit right. And she had her suspicions. She'd once found Daniel standing alone in the office break room, staring blankly at the security monitor that showed the front lobby. When she asked what he was doing, tying they'd grown up together, gone to college together, and for years, they were inseparable. But something had changed. People close to them noticed they weren't speaking anymore, and rumors started swirling. Some said Daniel blamed Brian for the breakup with Emily, hinting at an affair that may or may not have happened. Others believed Brian had tried to warn Emily about something Daniel had done in the past, something she wasn't supposed to know. Now, here's where it gets murky. In any good true crime story, you need more than one suspect. You need layers, confusion, and just enough misleading clues to make the truth hard to see. So, let's talk about Brian. He was Daniel's closest friend, or had been, until recently. Just that something felt off. A drawer slightly open, a photo frame tilted, a faint smell of cologne that didn't belong to her. She chalked it up to stress. Told herself she was being paranoid. But even paranoia has roots. And sometimes, those roots are tangled in truth. Emily mentioned to a friend that she felt like someone had been inside her apartment, not that anything was stolen. That's what made this case so maddening. You could line up 10 different pieces of evidence, and for each one, someone like Daniel, calm, articulate, careful, could give you a story that almost made sense. Almost. And yet, that nagging feeling kept creeping back in. Like something wasn't adding up. Like we were all being manipulated into looking in the wrong direction. And just when the pieces seemed to point to Daniel, another potential suspect would come into focus. There was Emily's boss, Rick. Older, well-respected, but a little too interested in her personal life. He sent late-night texts that crossed professional lines, and there were whispers that he'd shown up uninvited at her apartment once, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Could he have been the one behind it all? Could jealousy or rejection have driven him to something darker? The cops didn't rule him out, and neither should we. Or maybe it was Emily herself. I know it sounds crazy, but don't dismiss the idea too quickly. There were discrepancies in her story. Details she changed. A timeline that didn't quite match up. Some of the evidence seemed almost staged, like someone wanted to be found or wanted someone else to be blamed. And in the middle of it all, you had Daniel, calm, collected, and increasingly isolated. Every new piece of information only added more fog, not clarity. You're probably wondering what happened. What exactly went down that turned a quiet neighborhood into the scene of a criminal investigation that made headlines and flooded social media? What pushed someone over the edge? And how did detectives manage to untangle the whole mess so fast, with a trail that seemed deliberately scrambled? That's the part that's coming next, the part where every twisted thread begins to unravel. Because the truth wasn't just buried. It was hidden in plain sight. And once the detectives saw the one clue they'd missed the first time, everything snapped into focus. But before I tell you what they found, you need to understand one last thing. Daniel didn't act alone. Or at least, that's what someone wanted us to believe. The moment the investigation started gaining traction, things took a strange turn. Just when detectives thought they were closing in on Daniel, or at least confirming his involvement, a crucial piece of evidence vanished. It was a single flash drive, one that had been carefully cataloged and logged by the forensics team, containing footage pulled from a nearby traffic camera. The footage was supposed to show a car, possibly Daniel's, driving away from Emily's apartment around 3:42 a.m., just minutes after the neighbors reported hearing what they believed was a scream. But when detectives went to review the files again, the drive was gone. Not misplaced. Not filed incorrectly.
Gone.
Vanished from the evidence locker, without a trace. Internal Affairs was brought in, and suddenly, the investigation wasn't just about a possible murder, it was about who was trying to cover it up. That's when a strange message appeared in the inbox of one of the lead detectives. No subject line. No name. Just a short sentence. Stop digging. You don't know who you're dealing with. At first, it seemed like a prank. Maybe someone playing games after seeing the case, make headlines. But then came the second message. This one was more direct and chillingly specific. Check Daniel's file again. You missed something. Something he buried a long time ago. That line changed everything. The team went back, this time combing through Daniel's background with a fine-tooth comb. And that's when they uncovered a sealed juvenile record. Something so tightly hidden, it never came up during the initial run-through of his criminal history. But with the right court order, they got access, and what they found painted a very different picture of the man they thought they knew. Turns out, this wasn't Daniel's first encounter with violent behavior. At just 17, he'd been implicated in an incident involving another student who'd gone missing for 2 days before showing up bruised and terrified, refusing to speak about what had happened. No charges were ever filed. No one talked. And just like that, the file was sealed. But the more detectives looked, the more the pattern emerged. Whispers of control issues, volatile outbursts behind closed doors, and a tendency to isolate romantic partners under the guise of protecting them. That wasn't the Daniel his coworkers or neighbors knew. That was someone else entirely. Someone calculated. Someone dangerous. And yet not everything lined up. That's when Layla, the coworker who had earlier voiced suspicions, suddenly clammed up. Detectives went to re-interview her, hoping to get more details about Daniel's behavior in the weeks leading up to the crime. But this time, she was different. Nervous.
Shaky.
She kept looking over her shoulder, and when pressed, she finally admitted that someone had shown up at her apartment a few nights ago. She didn't see a face, just a figure, standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching. When she tried to call the police, the figure disappeared. Since then, she'd started receiving anonymous texts. They weren't threatening, not directly, but they made it clear she was being watched. And they all ended with the same phrase, "You don't want to be next." This case, which had started as a fast-moving investigation with a clear suspect, was now falling apart under the weight of secrets and fear. And just when it seemed like they were finally pulling the threads together, a new player entered the scene. Rick, Emily's boss. Remember him? The one who had always seemed a little too invested in her personal life. Well, Rick came forward with a bombshell of his own. According to him, Emily had confided in him about Daniel's behavior. Controlling, paranoid, and increasingly aggressive. But then Rick said something that caught investigators off guard. He claimed he'd warned Emily to break things off, told her she might be in danger, but more importantly, he hinted that he had been the one who convinced her to file for a restraining order that, oddly enough, was never submitted to the court.
Why?
Because someone intercepted it. That's right, there was a copy of the draft, signed by Emily and dated 2 days before her death. But it never reached the system. No record. No action. Nothing. Which meant someone close to her, someone she trusted to help, may have deliberately kept her from getting the protection she needed. And suddenly, Rick didn't seem like such a caring mentor anymore. He seemed like a man with something to hide. And when pressed, his story started to crack. He claimed he'd destroyed the form by mistake. Said it wasn't his place to interfere. But the timing, the details, it all felt too convenient. Too clean. And that's when another possibility emerged. What if Daniel wasn't the only one with blood on his hands? What if this was bigger than just a jealous ex? Now, the case is in chaos. A key piece of video evidence has disappeared. Witnesses are being silenced. And what looked like an open and shut case is now surrounded by whispers of conspiracy, corruption, and a hidden truth that no one wants uncovered. The more detectives push forward, the more walls they hit. Someone is working behind the scenes to keep the truth buried, and they're willing to threaten, manipulate, even destroy evidence to make sure it stays that way. But then something unexpected happens. An anonymous package arrives at the precinct. No return address. No fingerprints. Just a single object inside. A memory card.
On it?
A 10-second video clip. Grainy. Night vision. But what it shows changes everything. Because in those 10 seconds, there's a clear shot of someone entering Emily's apartment at 3:40 a.m. But the person in the footage isn't Daniel. And just like that, the entire case flips upside down. Who is the figure in the video? Why did they want Daniel to take the fall? And more importantly, what really happened to Emily that night? The answers are out there. But getting to them means facing a truth darker than anyone imagined. And if you think the worst is over, think again. Just as investigators began to process the shock from the memory card footage showing someone other than Daniel entering Emily's apartment at the crucial hour, another layer of the mystery began to unfold, one that no one saw coming, and one that threatened to undo everything the case had built so far. A woman named Jenna came forward. She hadn't spoken to law enforcement during the initial investigation, hadn't even been mentioned in any official reports. But her name was familiar to one of the detectives, and not in a good way. Jenna was Daniel's ex-fiancée, someone he'd been engaged to nearly 7 years earlier before their relationship ended abruptly, under circumstances that had never been fully explained. At the time, Jenna had disappeared from Daniel's life overnight, moved across the state, and cut off all communication. Most people assumed it was just another messy breakup. But now, Jenna had something to say, and what she said turned the entire investigation inside out. She didn't just show up at the station. She was driven there by a private security firm, escorted in by 2 bodyguards, her eyes scanning every corner of the lobby as if she expected someone to be watching. And then she pulled out her phone and handed it over to the lead detective without a word. On the screen was a text message, received just 2 days earlier. It was identical to the one Layla had received. Stop digging. You don't know who you're dealing with. But what made Jenna's message even more terrifying was that she wasn't digging. She hadn't spoken Daniel's name in years. So, why was someone trying to silence her now? Jenna explained that after her engagement with Daniel ended, she tried to move on. But she always felt like she was being watched. Odd things would happen, her mail tampered with, photos disappearing from her social media, even her car broken into once without anything stolen. She reported these incidents at the time, but without proof, nothing came of them. Eventually, she assumed it was paranoia.
Until now.
Because when news of Emily's case broke, Jenna started getting calls from blocked numbers. Silence on the other end. Just breathing. And then the message. Jenna knew, deep down, that whatever happened between Daniel and Emily, it wasn't an isolated event. It was part of something bigger. Something that had been festering for years. The detectives pressed her for more information, and that's when she dropped another bombshell. Daniel had kept a storage unit, one he visited frequently during the final months of their relationship. He always claimed it was for old computer parts and junk he couldn't keep at home, but she'd always suspected there was more to it. The address Jenna gave them was in a remote part of town, one that wasn't mentioned in any of Daniel's personal records. When investigators followed up, they found the unit had recently been emptied, cleared out just a few days after Emily's murder. No security footage. No digital trail. Just a signed exit form with a name that didn't match Daniel's, but matched someone else in the case. Rick. Suddenly, the evidence started shifting. Rick, who had seemed like a meddling boss with an inappropriate interest in Emily, was now connected to Daniel in a way no one had previously considered. Financial records uncovered a quiet business partnership between them from 2 years ago, something never disclosed. They'd co-invested in a tech startup that failed within months, costing both men tens of thousands. There were email exchanges, legal threats, and then total silence. Whatever happened between them, it wasn't just personal. It was toxic, unresolved, and potentially explosive. At the same time, a forensic technician working the case discovered something strange while reanalyzing the digital footage from Emily's apartment complex. In the enhanced frame-by-frame playback of the original footage, before the memory card footage was sent, there was a small, almost imperceptible flash from inside Emily's window. The timestamp? 3:40 a.m. That same minute the unknown figure was caught entering the apartment on the new footage. Initially dismissed as a reflection or camera glitch, the technician enhanced the sequence and realized it was a camera flash. Someone inside was taking a photo at the exact moment the intruder was approaching. Which raised a terrifying question. Was Emily awake and aware of the danger when it happened? And, if so, where's the photo she took? As he sat there, phone still in his hand, headlights suddenly lit up the living room window. A car idled outside.
Too still.
Too silent. Donovan rose slowly and approached, every nerve in his body firing. When he stepped onto the porch, the car peeled off into the night, but not before he saw the driver's face, Daniel. Emily's boyfriend. Supposedly cleared. Supposedly broken. What was he doing here? And more importantly, why did he look directly at Donovan like he expected to see him? The case had turned into a twisted maze, and now every path seemed to double back on itself. Donovan was losing track of who to trust, and the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. Choices that once seemed obvious now felt like traps. Every move carried weight. Every whisper could be a warning. And now, with the phone still playing Ava's last words in his mind, and the image of Daniel driving away into the dark, Donovan knew one thing for certain. The only way out was through. But someone, maybe everyone, was trying to make sure he never got there. The storm broke without warning. It wasn't rain or thunder. It was something colder. Donovan sat in his car outside the old courthouse archives, barely breathing as his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. Again. He almost didn't answer, but some instinct, old and primal, told him to pick up. You were warned, the voice said, low and steady. You should have stopped digging. Now, it's not just your life on the line. The call ended before Donovan could even respond. But the message was crystal clear. They were done with subtlety. This was war. He stormed inside, heart racing. He'd come here chasing a name, an obscure city contractor listed in files tied to Rick's early tech developments. What he didn't expect was a folder, already pulled, already waiting for him at the clerk's desk. No one should have known he was coming. Yet the documents were there almost like bait. He flipped through them, confusion mounting with every page. The contracts weren't just for software. They were for surveillance installations, dozens of them. Across schools, hospitals, even private residences. Signed off years ago by city officials. Funded by shell companies with no traceable origin. And every single one linked back to the same IP infrastructure Rick's company had developed. It wasn't just a glitch in the system. This was the system. Donovan's vision blurred. He wasn't chasing a rogue partner or a personal betrayal anymore. He was standing in the middle of a full-blown surveillance conspiracy. The kind that didn't just monitor criminals, it monitored everyone. Every movement. Every conversation. Ava hadn't disappeared into madness. She disappeared because she knew the truth. She'd become part of the very thing she once vowed to fight. But for what purpose? And for who? He left the building, but not before snapping photos of every document. He knew better than to walk around with physical evidence now. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, a familiar figure waited by his car. Captain Harris. The one person who'd backed him through thick and thin. The man who told him to walk away. The man who said he was being taken off the case for his own good. Donovan slowed, his hand moving subtly toward the inside of his coat. But Harris raised both hands in mock surrender. "You're not the only one who wants answers," he said, stepping closer. "But you're going about it wrong." Donovan narrowed his eyes. "You're part of it, aren't you?" "No," Harris said, shaking his head. "But I've known about it for longer than I care to admit. There are names on those contracts that don't just belong to corporate boardrooms. They belong to this department. Judges, politicians, even federal agents. You're in deeper than you realize." "And Ava?" Donovan's voice cracked. Harris hesitated. She tried to take them down. Years ago. But she realized the only way to stop them was to join them. Get inside. Wait for the right moment. "She didn't betray you, Donovan. She's been trying to protect you." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. Yet deep down, something in Donovan's gut believed it. He thought he'd been chasing a traitor, but maybe he'd been chasing a soldier on the inside of enemy lines. But if that was true, why the cryptic messages? The misdirection? The threats? Before he could respond, a black SUV came screeching around the corner. Tires smoking. Windows tinted. Harris's expression dropped. "Run," he said, shoving Donovan behind him just as the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Harris went down, clutching his side. Donovan ducked behind a parked car, pulling Harris with him. "They found you," Harris gasped, blood soaking through his shirt. "You have to end it. Go to Warehouse 9. The servers, they're still there. Burn it down if you have to. Just don't let them reset it." Warehouse 9. It had come up before in the documents. Supposedly shut down years ago after an electrical fire. But what if it had never been closed? What if it was where they ran everything from? The thought barely formed before Donovan made his move, sprinting into the alley, dodging bullets, sirens echoing somewhere in the distance. He didn't look back. Couldn't. There was no more room for doubt or hesitation. They weren't just watching him, they were trying to erase him. Erase everything. That night, as the city buzzed with another trending headline, "Corrupt officer shot outside government building," Donovan disappeared. Off-grid. Alone. But determined. Because now he knew what this was all about. Not just surveillance. Not just control. This was about power. About building a world where secrets were currency and truth was a threat. And Donovan? He was the last person standing between them and total silence. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that someone else was already waiting at Warehouse 9. Someone who knew he'd come. Someone who had planned for it. And they weren't there to stop him. They were there to finish what they started. The warehouse stood like a ghost on the edge of the city, cloaked in rust and shadows, surrounded by cracked pavement and silence, so dense it swallowed every footstep. Donovan pressed against the wall outside the back entrance, pulse pounding so hard it blurred the sound around him. He'd spent years chasing pieces, fragmented truths, twisted lies, faces that wore masks so long they forgot what was underneath. But this was it. The end of the maze. The place where everything began, and, if he had anything to say about it, the place where it would end. The key card Harris gave him still worked. That alone told Donovan this place wasn't abandoned. It was alive, operating under the illusion of decay, just like the people behind it. Inside, the space was massive, filled with rows of humming servers and screens casting eerie blue light across the concrete walls. It didn't look like a lair. It looked like a brain. This was the heart of the operation. Every movement, every conversation, every decision made by thousands of people over the years, it was all stored here. Lives mapped in metadata. Secrets archived like insurance policies. Donovan moved quickly but cautiously, staying low as he navigated between server racks. Then he saw her.
Ava. Alive.
Standing across the room, hands raised slowly, as if she knew this moment would come. "You made it," she said softly, voice shaking. "I didn't know if you would." Donovan froze. His instincts screamed at him, run, hide, fight. But instead, he just asked, "Are you part of this?" Meanwhile, public pressure was building. The story had gone viral across Reddit true crime threads, TikTok theory videos, and trending Twitter hashtags like #EmilyCaseUncovered and #WhoIsInTheFootage. Everyone had a theory. Some thought Daniel was a pawn, others believed Rick had orchestrated everything, and a few even pointed fingers at Jenna or Layla, suggesting a twisted revenge plot. But none of the theories explained the full picture. None of them connected the dots in a way that made total sense. The deeper the detectives dug, the more fragmented the story became. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had motives. And everyone, it seemed, had something to lose. Then, just when it felt like the tension couldn't escalate further, another clue surfaced, this time mailed directly to the lead detective's home. A plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo. Old, grainy, but unmistakably real. It showed a much younger Daniel, Rick, and someone else, someone the detectives didn't immediately recognize, standing together in front of an abandoned building marked out of service. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note. "This is where it began. This is where it ends." But who was the third person in the photo? And what happened at that building? That's the next question. Because whatever happened there still haunts everyone involved. And the truth is about to get even darker. The moment that photograph landed in the detective's hands, something shifted, almost like a trap had been triggered. That night, as Detective Miles Donovan stood in his dimly lit kitchen staring at the photo, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not the kind that came with high-stakes cases or tense interrogations. He was used to that. This was different. It was personal. A deep, gnawing sense that someone was watching him, studying his every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. He couldn't shake it. Even after securing the photo in an evidence bag and locking it away, his mind raced. Why had it been sent to him? Why not the department? Why his home address? That envelope was a message. Not just about the case, it was about him. And whatever message it was carrying, it wasn't over. By the next morning, that tension turned into something far more concrete. Detective Donovan's car had been tampered with. His tires slashed in a precision cut that looked almost surgical. There were no security camera hits on the street. No witnesses. Just a dead vehicle, sliced open and left as a warning. Then came the call. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something in his gut told him he needed to. On the other end was silence, just like Jenna described. Not a single word, until finally a voice whispered, "You should have let her die quietly." The line went dead. That was it. No explanation. No clue as to who made the call. But the weight of those 7 words crushed any remaining illusion that this was a normal investigation. This was now a game of survival, and someone was rewriting the rules in real time. The department tried to trace the call, but it had been routed through so many proxies it was practically a ghost. That same day, Donovan's partner, Detective Ava Ruiz, failed to show up for work. At first, everyone thought she might be tied up in the field or caught in traffic. But by noon, there was still no response. No texts. No calls. Nothing. She wasn't answering her phone. She wasn't at home. She wasn't anywhere. Donovan drove straight to her apartment, flashing his badge to bypass security. The moment he stepped inside, it was clear something was wrong. Ava's front door was locked from the inside, but the place looked like it had been untouched for days. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just silence. Her half-finished coffee still sat on the counter. Her keys, her wallet, everything was there. All except her phone.
And her.
She was gone. The silence in that apartment screamed louder than any scene Donovan had walked into before. He stood in the doorway of her bedroom, heart pounding, trying to convince himself this wasn't connected. That Ava might have just left on her own. That maybe she needed space. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Ava was methodical, predictable, always on time, always in control. And she would never, ever vanish without a trace, especially not while they were chasing a killer. Suddenly, the walls around Donovan started closing in. He began replaying every recent conversation, every move they had made in the case. Had someone followed them from Emily's apartment? From Rick's office? From the storage unit? The memory of that grainy video replayed in his mind, the figure slipping into the shadows, the flash from Emily's window, the encrypted file that vanished before they could unlock it. What if they were never meant to find the truth? What if the killer hadn't just anticipated their moves, but had infiltrated the investigation itself? And then there was Rick. When Donovan went to follow up on his connection to the storage unit, he found out Rick had taken an unscheduled leave of absence from work. No explanation. No forwarding contact. Just disappeared, like Ava. What made it worse was that Rick's phone pinged one last time before going dark, near the same out-of-service building seen in the photo from the envelope. The building had long been boarded up, sitting on the edge of an abandoned industrial park riddled with broken glass and faded graffiti, a place where the city had stopped caring. It had once been a community shelter before a fire gutted the inside. Now it was just a shell. But someone had been there, recently. Fresh footprints were found in the dust, and a new padlock had been installed on the back door. The more Donovan uncovered, the more it felt like the case wasn't just spiraling out of control. It was being manipulated by something much larger, more calculated than anyone anticipated. He began questioning everyone. Was Jenna telling the truth about Daniel's past? Was Rick's relationship with Emily truly innocent? And what about Daniel himself? Was he still just a suspect? Or could he somehow be orchestrating this from the shadows, pulling strings in ways no one had yet realized? Donovan's nights became restless. Every sound outside his window made his pulse race. Every unknown car parked too long on his block felt like a threat. He started seeing people on the street who looked familiar in ways they shouldn't. He began to wonder if his phone was tapped, if someone was tracking his every step. The paranoia wasn't just creeping in, it was consuming him. But the most terrifying realization of all was that he could no longer trust anyone, not even the people he once considered allies. Because someone was watching him, and they weren't just one step ahead. They were setting the stage. Then came the final blow. An unmarked envelope slipped under his front door in the middle of the night. Inside was a single photograph. But this one was different. It showed Ava, tied to a chair in a dark room. Her eyes were open, terrified. Her mouth was taped shut. In her lap sat a sign with 3 words scribbled in black marker. He lied too. And that's when Donovan knew this wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about everyone who ever got too close. Because someone was orchestrating a truth so dark, it needed to stay buried at all costs. Even just about Daniel. And the clock was running out. Detective Donovan sat motionless in his living room. The photograph of Ava gripped tightly in his hands, the edges bent from the pressure of his grip. His pulse thundered in his ears as he tried to focus, but his thoughts were tangled in knots. He couldn't ignore the look in Ava's eyes, the desperation, the betrayal, the silent scream behind the duct tape. The message scrawled in black ink, "He lied too," kept echoing in his head, louder and louder until it became the only thing he could hear. But who was he? Daniel? Rick? Had Ava uncovered something before she vanished? The room felt colder now, more sinister, as if the walls themselves had leaned in closer to listen. Every answer seemed to spawn 10 more questions, and time was draining faster than he could think. Donovan rushed back to the precinct and demanded every last piece of evidence be pulled from the archives. He needed a fresh look at everything: videos, photos, transcripts, digital logs, even the chain of custody forms. If someone had tampered with anything, there had to be a crack somewhere a moment they slipped up. What he found instead was something so unexpected, it made his skin crawl. The original call that reported Emily's disappearance, the very first emergency dispatch that kicked this whole investigation off, wasn't made by her boyfriend Daniel like they'd assumed. The caller had disguised their voice, masked the number, but the timestamp matched perfectly with a digital key fob entry recorded at the front gate of Emily's building. The access card used? It belonged to Ava. He didn't want to believe it. His partner, his closest ally, the person he trusted with his life, had been at the scene before anyone even knew Emily was missing. And she had never disclosed it. Not in their debriefs, not in their planning, not even once in their late-night strategy sessions where they swore to be transparent about every detail. It didn't make sense. Ava wouldn't hide something like that. Not unless she had a reason. Not unless she was scared. Or, Donovan could barely bring himself to think it, not unless she was involved. Could the woman he trusted like family have been hiding something all along? He raced back through old surveillance footage, frame by frame, until something jumped out that he couldn't believe he had missed. In the hallway camera outside Emily's apartment, just hours before she vanished, there was a brief shot of someone exiting her door. The figure was small, hooded, barely visible under the grainy feed, but in their hand was a badge. A detective's badge. And not just any badge. Ava's. The time stamp? Just 37 minutes before Emily's phone stopped transmitting any data. The implication hit like a freight train. Ava had been there that night. She had entered Emily's apartment and left alone. No mention of it in her reports. No mention of it to Donovan. And now she was gone, conveniently vanished with no trace. Suddenly, Donovan saw everything differently. Every lead they'd chased together, every theory they'd built, it was all filtered through her. Had she been steering him away from the truth the whole time? Feeding him enough real details to keep him close, but just enough misdirection to stall the bigger picture? The storage unit discovery. The photo in the envelope. Even Rick's encrypted hard drive. It had all passed through Ava's hands first. And what if that mysterious disappearance wasn't the work of the person they thought they were chasing? What if it had been staged? A warning? A performance? Or worse, what if she wanted to be taken? His head spun with questions, but then another revelation hit him, something he had pushed aside because it hadn't made sense until now. The photograph from the envelope. The one with the reflection in the mirror, just barely visible in the corner. Donovan had assumed it was a trick of the light, maybe the killer's silhouette caught unintentionally. But now, zooming in with the department's upgraded enhancement software, the figure came into sharp focus. It wasn't a man. It wasn't Daniel. It was a woman. Blonde. With a scar on her left cheek. The same faint scar Ava got 3 years ago during a raid gone bad. The person in the reflection wasn't some faceless stalker. It was her. At first, he thought maybe Ava was being coerced, forced into helping under duress. But as he pulled deeper into her phone records, financials, and private messages, a darker picture emerged. She had been in contact with Rick months before Emily's disappearance. Texts encrypted through an off-the-books app. Trips that lined up with his. Meetings off the grid. Donovan uncovered a private transaction from an untraceable shell company to a burner account opened in her name, made just 3 days before Emily went missing. It was a payout. Substantial. enough to disappear, and enough to betray anyone. The room around Donovan began to spin. His partner, the person who fought beside him through endless cases, had possibly orchestrated the entire thing from the inside. Maybe not alone, but she was involved.
Deeply.
He thought about that last look in her photo. Was it fear, or was it guilt? Was she trying to warn him with the message? Or was she luring him deeper into a trap? And then another terrifying thought emerged. If Ava was part of it, if she knew where the bodies were buried, what else was she hiding? What else had she been willing to do? Just as Donovan prepared to go public with the discovery, another envelope arrived at the precinct, this time addressed to him, in bold black ink. Inside was a USB drive. No note. No label. Against every protocol he had ever followed, Donovan plugged it into a secure terminal. A single video file loaded. It showed Ava, alive, in a dimly lit room. But this time, she wasn't tied up. She wasn't gagged. She was staring straight into the camera, calm and unshaken. Her words sent chills down his spine. "You were never supposed to find this, Miles. I told you to stop digging. Now you'll have to choose, truth or survival." And with that, the screen went black. The truth wasn't what he thought it was. The case wasn't just about Emily. It wasn't about a killer hiding in the shadows. It was about the people standing right beside him. And now, the real question was, how deep did the betrayal go? And who else knew? Donovan didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, Ava's face appeared, calm, calculated, not the terrified victim he'd convinced himself she was. He played the video back more times than he could count, searching for a slip in her voice, a twitch in her expression, anything to suggest she was being coerced or that this was some elaborate cry for help. But there was none. She looked resolute, almost cold. The woman he'd once called family was speaking to him not as a friend, but as someone issuing a warning. No, a threat. And now he had to decide how far he was willing to go for the truth. He returned to the precinct, weary but determined. The department was buzzing about a press leak. A popular true crime YouTube channel had gotten hold of partial details about the case and uploaded a video titled, "Detective's Partner Vanishes." Was she in on it? It was already trending. The last thing Donovan needed was a media storm derailing his momentum. Still, it wasn't the public pressure that was tightening the noose, it was internal. That morning, his captain called him in and slid a sealed manila envelope across the table. Inside was a letter from Internal Affairs. He was being pulled from the case. Effective immediately. No explanation, just a vague reference to compromised objectivity. Donovan's jaw clenched as the realization hit him. Someone was pulling strings high up. Ava had friends in powerful places. Maybe Rick wasn't just a disgraced tech developer with a shady past. Maybe there were more players involved than he could imagine. He had to decide, follow orders and walk away, or break the rules and keep digging. He knew what Ava was trying to do. She was forcing him into a corner. Make him choose between staying safe within the system or risking everything for a truth that could destroy them all. But there was no middle ground. Not anymore. Later that night, Donovan made the hardest call of his life. He drove out to the suburbs, to the quiet little home where Ava's sister Rachel lived. Rachel had never wanted anything to do with law enforcement. She'd kept her distance from Ava's world and rarely spoke about their shared past. But now Donovan needed answers. He knocked on the door, heart pounding, unsure of how much Rachel knew, or if she'd even let him in. When she finally opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said flatly, stepping aside without asking questions. The conversation that followed cracked open a history Donovan had never been told. Years ago, before Ava joined the force, she had been involved with Rick. Not casually, deeply. They were inseparable, and at one point, they'd even gone off the grid for nearly a year. When Ava returned, she was different, driven, secretive, obsessed with redemption. She told Rachel she'd made mistakes, terrible ones, and that the only way to atone was to bury that version of herself forever. But now Donovan saw the pieces fitting together like jagged shards of a shattered mirror. Ava never left her past behind. She brought it with her, embedded it into the foundation of her new life. And now it was unraveling. Rachel hesitated, then handed him something, an old flip phone, cracked and barely functional. She gave this to me years ago. Said if anything ever happened, to give it to you. But only if I was sure you were ready to hear the whole truth. Donovan took the phone, his hands trembling slightly. The device powered on with a groan, revealing only one saved voicemail. He hit play. Ava's voice came through, raw and unfiltered, but it wasn't a confession.
It was a plea.
If you're hearing this, it means the truth is clawing its way out. You think you know me, Donovan, but you don't. Everything I've done was for something bigger than either of us. There are people watching you, listening. If you keep going, you won't just be putting yourself at risk. You'll be dragging others into it, people you care about. You have to decide what matters more, justice or survival. The message ended in static, but Donovan couldn't move. His mind was racing, but his body felt like it was carved from stone. That was the moment it hit him. This wasn't just about Ava or Rick or Emily. It was about a larger web of corruption, lies, and cover-ups that extended beyond anything he had imagined. And the worst part? If Ava was still playing a part in it, it meant she believed in what they were doing, whatever they was. Her eyes glistened, and she stepped forward slowly, showing no sign of hostility. I was, for a time, but not because I wanted to be. They offered me a choice, join or vanish. I chose survival, but I never stopped trying to destroy it from within. You think I left you, but I was trying to save you from this. Donovan's mind raced. It could be the truth, or another manipulation. And then a second voice echoed from behind the servers, one he hadn't heard in years but would never forget.
Rick.
Calm, confident, unapologetic. You always were sentimental, Ava. That's your problem. You think people can be saved. He stepped into view, still in a tailored suit, not a wrinkle out of place. The mastermind, the partner, the traitor. Rick held a tablet in his hands, lines of code dancing across it, as if he controlled the entire room with a flick of his fingers. We didn't build this to hurt people, Donovan. We built it to control chaos. Imagine what we could do with real predictive data. We could prevent wars, stop crimes before they happen, save lives. By watching everyone? Donovan spat. By turning the entire country into puppets? Rick shrugged. Better puppets than corpses. The confrontation exploded before Donovan could blink. Alarms blared. Lights cut out. Ava dove for a console, slamming her hand on a master key override while Rick activated a counter-command. A brutal digital tug-of-war erupted, systems flickering, warnings screaming. Sparks flew. But Donovan didn't care about the systems anymore. He cared about the man. He lunged at Rick, tackling him across a metal railing. The two crashed to the ground, fists flying, years of betrayal burning in every strike. Rick fought dirty, gouging, clawing, but Donovan had one thing Rick didn't: purpose. They wrestled beside a power junction, and that's when Donovan saw it, an emergency kill switch tucked behind a panel, labeled in fading paint. He hesitated. Flipping it could wipe everything: evidence, secrets, proof. But it would also end the surveillance. Forever. Rick saw it too, and lunged, but Donovan was faster. He hit the switch, and the server screamed before falling silent. One by one, they died, lights fading like the last breath of a beast finally slain. Rick collapsed beside him, coughing, beaten. You think you've won? You just burned every truth we had. Every file. Every backup. Donovan looked down at him, exhausted but resolute. Then we start over. Without lies. Without you. But just as the dust began to settle, Ava limped toward them, tablet in hand, face pale. Donovan, you need to see this. On the screen, a final file loaded. Hidden. Buried beneath firewalls and decoy data. It was a live feed of a different warehouse. Cameras. Racks. Identical to the one they just destroyed. Rick laughed, blood on his teeth. You didn't stop anything. This was just a replica. A decoy to test your limits. Donovan stared, numb. Ava's hands trembled as she realized the truth. They were never chasing the head of the snake. Just the tail. The real server farm? Still running. Still watching.
And now?
They knew exactly who the threat was. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. For weeks after the warehouse showdown, Donovan disappeared from public view. The headlines were chaos. Data leak exposes global surveillance ring. Former federal agent linked to explosive conspiracy, who is telling the truth. But the man behind them refused interviews, dodged cameras, and kept his voice silent in a world now screaming with questions. He wasn't hiding from justice or shame. He was searching. Because if the warehouse they destroyed was just a replica, then somewhere out there, the real system was still alive, still watching, still pulling strings from behind its digital curtain. But the difference now? The world knew. The illusion of safety had shattered. People began asking questions, demanding transparency from corporations and governments alike. Protests erupted in cities nationwide, online watchdog groups exploded in popularity, and for the first time in a long time, the public wasn't sleepwalking, they were wide awake. Donovan returned one morning, quietly stepping into a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Portland, where Ava had been waiting. She looked different, older, more grounded, but the same fire burned behind her tired eyes. They didn't say much at first, just shared a look that spoke of battles fought, betrayals survived, and a connection forged in fire. Finally, she handed him a small, encrypted drive. It's not everything, but it's something. Fragments from the real hub, enough to keep the heat on them. Donovan took it without a word, slipping it into his jacket, as if it weighed 100 pounds. And maybe it did. Truth always had weight, especially when it came with blood and sacrifice. Over time, Donovan gave what he had to investigative journalists, carefully, strategically, feeding the machine just enough to keep it burning without letting it consume everything. He didn't want revenge anymore. He wanted responsibility. Not to be a hero, not to clear his name, but to be part of the cleanup. To fix what he once helped create. And that's when the most unexpected shift happened. People started listening, following. Not just because of the leaks or the drama, but because he was honest in a world drowning in spin. Podcasts dissected his every move. Commentators debated his motives. On YouTube, a viral documentary titled The Man Who Brought Down the Surveillance State dominated the trending tab for weeks. And still, Donovan stayed in the shadows, working quietly, refusing to let fame distract him from the mission. But it wasn't over. Not really. Late one night, while scanning through a decrypted archive, Donovan found something buried in the metadata of one of Rick's final recordings, a single GPS coordinate, pinging every 96 hours like a heartbeat. It wasn't near any known data facility, and its timing was too precise to be random. He stared at it for a long time, the glow from the screen casting strange shadows on his face. Ava stood behind him, silent, waiting for him to decide. Because this was the question they both knew would come. Was he ready to go deeper? Was this about closure? Or had he already become part of something even bigger than he could admit? That's the thing about truth. It doesn't just set you free, it makes you question everything you thought you knew. Donovan had chased the villain, exposed the system, and brought an empire to its knees. But in doing so, he'd opened a door that could never be closed. The surveillance wasn't just a network.
It was a mindset.
A culture. A sickness disguised as safety. And somewhere, someone was still watching, still waiting, still adapting. He didn't know where the next coordinate would lead. But he knew one thing. This time, he wouldn't go alone. And maybe that's what leaves the real mark. Not the explosions or the scandals or the headlines, but the quiet resolve of one person refusing to let the system win. The belief that even when the odds are stacked and the truth is buried, it can still be unearthed, piece by piece, name by name, lie by lie. Maybe that's why you're still here, watching until the very end. Because deep down you want to believe it too. That no matter how powerful the lie, the truth will always find a way to fight back. It all started with a phone call no parent ever wants to receive, a call from the police, asking them to come down to the station immediately. No explanations. No names. Just urgency in the officer's voice. The kind of call that turns your stomach inside out before you even hang up. But what no one expected, what shook an entire community to its core, was that the suspect in this disturbing case wasn't some hardened criminal, wasn't a troubled adult with a violent past. It was a quiet, soft-spoken young boy. A child. And what he confessed to. Investigators are still trying to make sense of it. This is not your usual crime story. This is the kind of case that forces seasoned detectives to sit in stunned silence, staring at one another across a cold, dimly lit interrogation room, asking, how could this even be possible? Now, before we get any deeper, I want you to know something. You're about to get the answer to the very question that brought you here. I promise, by the end of this story, everything will be laid bare. The shocking truth, the twisted layers behind the confession, and the one moment that changed everything. But don't skip ahead. Trust me, each detail in this story matters. Each moment builds on the last like puzzle pieces falling into place, revealing a picture far more disturbing than you're ready for. And I'm going to walk with you through all of it, step by chilling step.
So, stay with me. Take a breath.
Because what this young boy admits to is not just criminal, it's deeply psychological. And more importantly, it opens a door into the darkness that can sometimes live right inside a home that looks normal from the outside. Maybe that's why this case hits so hard. Maybe that's why viewers across the US can't stop watching it unfold. Because deep down, we all ask ourselves, what if this happened in my neighborhood? What if this was my child? And the scariest question of all, what if I never saw the signs? This case began in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen. A place with white picket fences, neatly mowed lawns, and friendly neighbors who waved to each other on their way to work. The kind of place where parents feel safe letting their kids play in the front yard. But that illusion was shattered the moment officers arrived at the small two-story home tucked at the end of Willow Creek Drive. A 911 call had come in, just a few words were said. Enough to get a patrol car dispatched. But not enough to prepare anyone for what they would find inside. The front door was unlocked. The house was silent. Almost too silent. The kind of silence that feels unnatural. Inside, everything looked undisturbed until they reached the back bedroom. That's where they found her. A woman in her late 30s, lying motionless, her body partially covered with a blanket as if someone had tried, clumsily, to hide what had been done. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. No weapon in sight. And no one else home, at first. But minutes later, a young boy walked through the front door. His backpack still on his shoulders. His face calm. Too calm. Like he didn't realize or didn't care about what had just happened. Officers gently pulled him aside, unsure if he had witnessed something or if he was in danger himself. What happened next changed the entire course of the investigation. When asked if he knew where his mother was, the boy looked them directly in the eye and said, "I already told her goodbye." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They thought maybe the child was in shock. But then, he added something that sent chills down their spines. "I did what I had to do. She told me I had a demon. So I set it free." Now, ask yourself, how does a child even begin to say something like that? What does it take for someone so young to form that kind of belief? And more importantly, where does that belief come from? That's where the psychological tension in this case begins to unravel. Because behind those few haunting words was an entire history of manipulation, fear, isolation, and a family dynamic so twisted, even trained professionals were left shaken. And that's what I want to explore with you today. We're not just diving into a crime, we're diving into the mind of a young child who committed the unthinkable. A child who many say, before all this happened, was just a normal boy.
Happy. Kind.
Quiet but polite. He loved reading books about space. He wanted to be an astronaut. His teachers described him as gifted. But there was something no one saw, something festering under the surface. A storm building in silence. This story takes us beyond the crime scene. It takes us inside the interrogation room where, bit by bit, the boy explained what led him to that moment. How his mother's obsession with spiritual cleansing, Her belief in supernatural forces and her increasingly erratic behavior had turned his world upside down. She didn't trust anyone. She pulled him out of school. She kept him away from other kids. She told him stories about devils hiding in people. And eventually, she told him that he was the devil himself, that he needed to be saved, that pain was the only way to purify his soul. And here's the part that investigators can't shake. He believed her. Not right away, but over time, with no one else to turn to, no other voices to drown out the madness, her words became his truth. And when someone's reality is shaped entirely by fear, isolation, and psychological control, how much of what they do can truly be called their choice? This is where things get murky, where the lines blur between victim and perpetrator, where investigators, even the most seasoned among them, find themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about motive and responsibility. It's why this case isn't just being studied by law enforcement, it's being reviewed by psychologists, social workers, and even child trauma specialists. Because this isn't just a criminal story, it's a human one. A tragedy that unfolded behind closed doors, hidden in plain sight, until it exploded in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. And I know what you're thinking. You want to understand how a boy just 12 years old could go through with it. What pushed him past the point of no return? Was it mental illness? Was it abuse? Was it a moment of rage? Or something darker, something more calculated? Stick with me, because in just a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the exact timeline that led to the night of the crime. You'll hear how detectives first dismissed his words, how they thought he might be lying to protect someone else. You'll see how, piece by piece, evidence began to point back to him. How the forensics, the interviews, even the boy's drawings from weeks before, all began to tell the same horrifying story. But there's a twist in this case. One moment that made everyone stop in their tracks. A detail so bizarre, so out of place that it made detectives question if something or someone else was involved. That's the part you don't want to miss. If you're watching this, you're here because you want the full story. You want the truth. And you're going to get it. But I'm asking you to stay locked in.
Don't click away.
Don't scroll to the comments just yet. Because everything in this case, every clue, every conversation, every eerie moment, builds to a revelation you will not see coming. And if you've been following true crime trends on YouTube lately, you know that cases involving young suspects are dominating the conversation. Reminders of what happens when the signs are missed, when systems fail, and when children are left to battle invisible demons alone. This is one of those stories. And it's only just beginning. People are fascinated,
Shocked.
horrified, and yet they can't look away.
Why?
Because these aren't just crimes. They're warnings. Because just when investigators thought they had the full picture, just when the boy's confession seemed to make sense, a single piece of evidence turned everything upside down. A discovery so chilling, it made one detective leave the room in silence. Something was hidden inside the house. Something no one had noticed before. And once they found it, everything they thought they knew about this case unraveled in an instant. What did they find? You're about to find out. But first, let's go back to where it all began. To the quiet little street. To the house with the white curtains. To the moment when a young boy stood face to face with a police officer and told the truth no one was prepared to hear. Stay with me because the real story starts. Right now, did I end the weeks leading up to the tragedy, there were subtle signs, moments that, in hindsight, feel like warning bells no one knew to listen for. The boy, whose name we won't mention just yet, had started withdrawing from the few connections he had left. At school, his attendance became sporadic before his mother pulled him out altogether. Teachers noted a shift in his demeanor during the final weeks he was present. He went from raising his hand in class and smiling at his peers to sitting quietly, eyes vacant, barely engaging with anyone. One teacher, who later gave a statement, recalled a particular moment that stuck with her. During a classroom activity about family, the boy drew a picture that showed himself alone on one side of the page, with his mother looming large on the other, surrounded by symbols she couldn't quite understand. At the time, she dismissed it as creative expression. Now, she wishes she had asked more questions. At home, neighbors described a woman who became increasingly paranoid. She stopped speaking to those who once waved and made casual conversation. She installed blackout curtains even though her windows already had blinds. She covered mirrors with sheets and left strange handwritten notes taped to her door, scriptures, warnings about spiritual warfare, and cryptic messages about being watched. At first, people thought she was just a bit eccentric. Every neighborhood has someone like that. But what no one realized was how far gone she truly was, or how deeply she had pulled her son into her delusions. The boy's father had been absent for years. According to official records and local gossip, he left when the boy was around 5 years old. There had been a custody battle, messy and short-lived, but in the end, the mother got full custody. No one had seen the father since. Some claimed he moved out of state. Others said he was dodging legal issues. But recently, and almost suspiciously, someone spotted a man resembling him parked down the block from the house late at night, just sitting in his car, engine off, staring in the direction of the home. It was reported once to the neighborhood watch, but by the time anyone came to check, the car was gone. At the time, the incident seemed minor. Now it seems like a missing piece. There's also the issue of the basement. Police didn't search it right away, there was no reason to. The main crime scene was upstairs, and nothing downstairs seemed out of place from the initial walkthrough. But a few days later, after revisiting the home to collect additional evidence, one investigator noticed something odd: a broken latch on the door, positioned just slightly differently than it had been during the first search. What they found inside didn't just raise eyebrows, it sent the entire case spinning in a new direction. The basement was filled with religious texts, old VHS tapes, and stacks of journals. Some of the journals were the mother's, pages upon pages of rants, predictions, accusations of being stalked by demons and possessed neighbors. But among those were other writings, less frantic, more calculated, describing events that hadn't even happened yet. Some mention names of people who had nothing to do with the family. One entry specifically described a sacrifice needed to free her child from the devil. The date she wrote? Just 2 days before the murder. The more detectives read, the less sure they became of the boy's full guilt. Was he brainwashed? Coerced? Or perhaps covering for someone else? One theory began to emerge that suggested the boy had help, or at least wasn't acting entirely alone. That theory gained traction when an old family friend surfaced, a man named Aaron, who used to attend the same church as the boy's mother. According to several neighbors, he had been seen entering the house on multiple occasions during the past year. At first, they assumed he was just providing emotional support, maybe helping with homeschooling. But it turns out Aaron had a criminal record. Nothing violent, mostly fraud, trespassing, and a disturbing history of exploiting vulnerable individuals. And when he was questioned by police, his answers didn't quite line up. He claimed he hadn't seen the boy or his mother in months, but security footage from a nearby gas station placed him near the house the night before the murder. Still, there were no fingerprints. No DNA. Nothing that definitively placed him inside. Just inconsistencies. Suspicion. Circumstantial evidence. But that was enough to make detectives dig deeper into his connection with the family. And that's when a darker history began to emerge. Aaron had once led a small fringe group, a religious offshoot that was later disbanded after allegations of mental and emotional abuse toward its members. The boy's mother had attended several of their meetings years ago. And though the group officially disbanded, some believe the ideology continued in private. Could Aaron have planted ideas in her mind? Could he have manipulated both mother and son into believing they were part of some divine plan? As investigators peeled back more layers, a disturbing pattern began to reveal itself. The mother had been ordering strange books from obscure online shops, manuals on exorcism, purification rituals, even self-written prayers designed to cleanse the soul through blood. These weren't things the average person stumbled upon. It required digging, searching, falling down the kind of online rabbit holes that lead people away from reality. And yet, amidst all this chaos, one thing stood out. There was no record of the boy ever receiving therapy. No check-ins. No interventions from school counselors. Not a single documented concern raised by Child Protective Services, despite clear signs of psychological decline. And so the question keeps coming back. How did everyone miss it? How did a young child fall so far into darkness without anyone noticing? Was he truly a killer? Or was he a victim of something far more sinister? A pawn in a game he never agreed to play? But just when it felt like investigators were starting to get a clearer picture of what really happened, something else came to light. A digital file. A single video clip recovered from an old phone tucked away in a drawer in the mother's bedroom. The file was dated 3 days before her death. What's on that video? I'll tell you this, it changed everything. Because in that video, we hear something. Something that shifts the focus away from the boy entirely. As investigators prepared to examine the contents of the recovered phone, anticipation filled the air. They expected grainy footage, maybe erratic ramblings, anything to give more context to the escalating madness inside that house. But when the video was finally decrypted and opened, it cut off after only 15 seconds. The file had been corrupted. Whether it was intentional tampering or the result of neglect over time, no one could say. What remained, though, was enough to send chills down every spine in that room. It showed the boy, not looking afraid or confused, but calm, sitting at the edge of a bed while his mother knelt beside him, whispering in his ear. Her voice was soft, almost soothing, but what she said was indecipherable, like she was speaking in a language no one could place. Then, just as the boy turned his head to face the camera, the screen went black. That was it. No context. No explanation. And the full version of the video? It was gone. The original file, supposedly backed up on the cloud, had disappeared. Wiped clean. The digital forensic team was baffled. They were sure the video had been downloaded in full just a few hours earlier. There was no sign of a hack. No trace of deletion in the logs. Someone had erased it, either remotely or they had someone inside who helped them do it. When news of the missing footage spread within the department, the case hit a wall. The detectives working the investigation started noticing odd things. One officer reported finding her car door open one morning with her glove box ransacked, but nothing missing. Another received a handwritten letter slipped under his windshield wiper with just 5 words. "You're asking the wrong questions." The message had no fingerprints, no identifying marks, and the paper was traced to a generic brand sold nationwide. No leads. No suspects. Just mounting paranoia. Still, one detective, Sergeant Harris, couldn't let it go. Something about the boy's quiet demeanor, the way he carried guilt like a coat he'd been forced to wear, didn't sit right. Harris had seen dozens of murder suspects, some cold, some broken, some filled with rage. But this child? He seemed confused by his own story. His account of that night changed subtly with each retelling. At times, he insisted he acted alone. At others, he said his mother guided his hand. And once, only once, he mentioned someone else.
A man.
He didn't give a name. Just said he was always watching. Digging through the family's history, Harris found something even more disturbing. A sealed case file from 10 years prior. It involved the mother, long before she had a child, during her early 20s. She had been arrested, briefly, for her role in a cult-like group that operated in the rural outskirts of the state. The group was tied to ritualistic practices and a string of bizarre disappearances, but nothing was ever proven. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, and the file had been buried under layers of bureaucratic red tape. No one in her current neighborhood knew about it. Not even the boy's father, who later told police he met her through a spiritual retreat years after the arrest. But here's where it gets even darker. That same group, the one she had supposedly left behind, was connected to none other than Aaron, the family friend who had become a person of interest. His involvement had been scrubbed from public records thanks to a plea deal on a separate fraud charge. His identity had changed once, maybe even twice. But now it was clear. Their paths had crossed long before anyone thought they had. So what did that mean for the boy? Was he raised within those beliefs, without anyone realizing it? Had he been taught from a young age to accept violence under the guise of salvation? Before Harris could follow up on this lead, he was pulled off the case. No explanation. Just a sudden internal reassignment and a vague note citing case fatigue. The move didn't make sense. He had the most knowledge, the most momentum. Why shut him down now? Behind the scenes, whispers started swirling. Higher-ups wanting to avoid further scandal, especially with the press getting wind of the boy's psychological evaluations. The official story? It was going to be spun as a tragic incident involving a mentally unstable child and a mother lost in delusion. Simple.
Clean.
Easier to sell to the public. But Harris wasn't done. Off the clock, under the radar, he kept pushing. He visited the mother's old addresses, dug through court documents, mental health records, and anything he could get his hands on. That's when he found the betrayal no one saw coming. One of his own colleagues, someone he'd trusted, had been secretly communicating with Aaron for months before the murder. Emails, burner numbers, hidden meetings. It wasn't just casual contact. It looked like coordination. Could this colleague have helped destroy the video? Could they have been involved in covering up something far bigger than just a murder? Every answer raised two more questions. The truth felt buried under layers of manipulation, silence, and fear.
Someone didn't want this case solved.
Someone was pulling strings from behind the curtain, and the deeper Harris went, the more dangerous it became. The boy remained in juvenile custody, quiet and reserved. No more outbursts. No more strange stories. But one day, during a mandatory psychiatric session, he drew something on a piece of paper, something chilling. It was a perfect sketch of a man's face. A man no one had ever shown him. A man no one believed he had ever met. That man was Aaron. Now the question isn't just whether the boy committed the crime. It's whether he was ever meant to survive it at all. And there's one last piece. A file Harris found locked inside a password-protected folder, buried on an old laptop the mother used for homeschooling. That file could contain the final truth. But the moment Harris tried to open it, the screen went black. And his phone rang. No number. No caller ID. Just one word whispered on the line before it cut out. Stop.
But why?
What was in that file that someone would go so far to protect? That's what we'll uncover next.
You said.
Just when Sergeant Harris thought things couldn't spiral any further out of control, the ripple effect of this case hit someone entirely unexpected. Jordan, the boy's estranged older half-sister, who lived in a different state and hadn't spoken to the family in years. She had been living under the radar, trying to distance herself from her mother's dark past, and it was only through a fluke, an article suggested by an algorithm on her social feed, that she even learned about her half-brother's alleged involvement in a brutal crime. At first, she dismissed it as clickbait. But when she opened the link, the headline wasn't the most chilling part. It was the photo embedded halfway down the page. A blurry still from the now-deleted video clip.
The boy.
Sitting on the bed, and kneeling beside him, her mother, whispering just as she used to when Jordan was a child and terrified in the night. That same tone, that same eerie calm. Something in her snapped. Memories she'd locked away for years came rushing back, and they weren't just vague flashes, they were vivid, detailed recollections of being forced to participate in what her mother used to call cleansing rituals, masked as spiritual healings, but always ending in some kind of pain. Jordan had always suspected that her mother's obsession with those rituals wasn't just harmless spiritualism but something more dangerous. Harris had already been under internal scrutiny for digging too deep into the case after being reassigned, and now here was another thread unraveling, another connection that made it clear this case wasn't just about one night of violence. It was about years of carefully hidden manipulation. Jordan agreed to meet Harris in person and hand over any old photos or journals she could find from her childhood. She was scared, but she wasn't backing down. Still, before they could even arrange the meeting, someone else intervened. Her apartment was broken into the night after she contacted Harris. Jordan had never seen the drawing before, and yet the man's face looked disturbingly familiar. But how could her brother have drawn someone she only remembered from her own nightmares? That man, she was sure, had been one of the regulars in her mother's circle. He was always just in the background, always watching, always silent. And now, somehow, he had reappeared in her brother's version of events, years later. When Jordan reached out to Sergeant Harris to share what she knew, she expected either disbelief or indifference. What she got instead was stunned silence. That same evening, Jordan received a message request on a private social media account she hadn't used in years. The sender's profile was blank, no photo, no posts, no followers. The message contained only two things: a screenshot of the same child-drawn sketch Harris had found, and a chilling caption that read, "He still remembers. When she left home at 16, she promised herself she would never look back." But now, with her little brother behind bars and a murder case growing colder by the day, she felt a responsibility she never asked for. She had to find out the truth, even if it meant reopening every door she had shut tight long ago. She remembered the way visitors came and went from their home at odd hours, how certain people only showed up once and were never spoken of again. She remembered a journal her mother kept, filled with strange symbols and names written in red ink, pages that Jordan had once tried to read but was beaten for touching. Nothing was stolen, nothing visible anyway, but someone had gone through her locked filing cabinet. Jordan kept her childhood journal in there, the one she had hidden in the base of a false drawer. It was gone. She hadn't told anyone where it was, not even Harris. That was the final confirmation she needed. Someone was watching her too. And whoever it was didn't want her memories becoming part of the investigation. The layers of this case were becoming impossible to ignore. Every person close to the boy had secrets. Every piece of supposed evidence seemed to contradict itself the deeper it was analyzed. Forensic inconsistencies had emerged from the original crime scene: blood splatter patterns that didn't align with the reported injuries, prints that had gone unidentified for weeks suddenly showing up as matches to people who should have had no access to the house. It all suggested tampering, but more than that, it suggested intent. Someone had orchestrated elements of this crime with a precision that didn't fit the idea of a child acting alone. Even the timeline began to shift. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station placed the mother's car in motion almost 30 minutes before the 911 call had been placed, suggesting she had left the scene after the crime and possibly returned before officers arrived. But if she had left, where did she go? And more importantly, who did she meet? That part of the video had been mysteriously corrupted as well. The digital artifacting occurred only on the segment that captured the car's license plate. The rest of the footage was crystal clear. According to digital analysts, that type of corruption would have to be deliberate and would require someone with advanced knowledge of surveillance software. Every step forward seemed to uncover something that only deepened the mystery. The boy's confession, once seen as the tragic centerpiece of the case, now felt almost irrelevant. Was he protecting someone? Was he coerced? Or was his version of events only one piece of a much darker narrative? What's even more chilling is that Jordan, now under constant stress, has started receiving phone calls at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night. No sound, no voice, just static. When she records the calls and plays them back, they contain what sounds like faint whispering layered under the noise. No one else can hear it clearly, but to her it sounds like a name, over and over again. Aaron. Viewers, this is no longer a question of guilt or innocence. This story is no longer about a boy and a murder. This is about a legacy of secrets buried so deeply they're bleeding through generations. The investigation is unraveling, and now everyone is a suspect. Every friend, every relative, every detective. The deeper we dig, the more we realize nothing in this story is what it first appeared to be. But the real shock? It's coming in the next twist, and you won't see it coming. Jordan had always believed that the worst was behind her, that after leaving her childhood home and cutting all ties, the nightmares would eventually fade. But as she walked alone down the dim, cracked sidewalk outside her apartment building one cold Thursday night, something inside her shifted. It was subtle at first, just the sense that someone was too close behind, the soft echo of a second set of footsteps pausing whenever she did. She quickened her pace and glanced back, but the street behind her was empty, blanketed in orange streetlight and shadows. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe just her nerves, the pressure of reopening a wound she had spent years trying to seal shut. But then, as she reached her car, she saw it, tucked under the wiper blade, a small folded piece of paper. No envelope, no writing on the outside. Just a single page, damp with condensation, that said in block letters, "Stop looking or you won't be able to forget." Beneath the warning was a sketch, one that matched the crude, chilling drawing her brother had made. The same man, the same eyes, and behind him, barely visible in the scribbled background, the outline of a small child in a corner. It was a message. Someone knew what she was uncovering, and they didn't want her getting any closer to the truth. The fear hit her in waves, rising up through her spine and resting heavy in her chest. This wasn't just some idle threat. This was real. Someone was watching her, listening to her, and now they were taunting her. She took the note straight to Sergeant Harris, whose expression darkened the moment he saw it. He was already on thin ice with the department for continuing to pursue a case they had marked as closed. The official report still pinned the crime on her brother, and any new leads he chased were considered a waste of time and resources. But the note changed everything. It meant someone was invested enough in silencing Jordan to take a serious risk. That level of intimidation didn't come from amateurs, it came from people with something to lose. And then, things took an even darker turn. The following morning, Jordan's best friend, Melissa, a nurse who had been helping her sift through old journals and files, didn't show up for her shift at the hospital. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment door was locked from the inside, lights on, kettle still warm. But she was gone. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, nothing taken. Just gone. Jordan's heart sank. The last person Melissa had spoken to was her, saying she'd look into it more in the morning. But now, the photo was gone from Jordan's phone. The text thread deleted. The digital forensic team Harris brought in couldn't even retrieve a cache. It was as if the entire conversation had been scrubbed clean. They'd been texting the night before about an odd code she found written in the margins of Jordan's old childhood journal. Melissa had snapped a blurry photo before bed. Jordan couldn't shake the weight of dread closing in. Every time she turned a corner or opened her door, she expected someone or something to be waiting. Her mind spun endlessly, questioning every face in a crowd, every car parked too long on her street, every flicker of light in her rearview mirror. Was someone following her? Were they watching from a distance, or closer than she imagined? What if they were already inside her life, pretending to be an ally? Her thoughts grew darker by the hour, paranoia bleeding into every interaction. The worst part? She couldn't tell if she was spiraling or if the danger was truly that close. Even Sergeant Harris began acting strangely. He had always been a stable presence, sharp, methodical, grounded. But lately, he seemed distracted, glancing over his shoulder during their meetings, cutting their conversations short. When she confronted him, asking if he was withholding something, he hesitated just a second too long. His eyes darted away before he assured her that everything was fine, that the department was just applying pressure. But Jordan saw through it. He was scared too, he just didn't want to admit it. It was as if the case had grown a second layer, invisible but ever-present, and Harris was starting to feel the heat just as much as she was. That night, unable to sleep, Jordan revisited the childhood memory that haunted her most, one she had never spoken aloud. It involved a man she only knew by his initials, EC. He had been a frequent guest in their home when she was around 7, always arriving late at night and never speaking unless their mother gave him permission. She remembered once being told to stay quiet in the attic while he visited, and she obeyed, peeking through the wooden slats. What she saw then never made sense. EC pacing with a flashlight, whispering to someone in the dark, as if he were rehearsing. When she asked her mother about it the next day, she was slapped and told to never speak his name. But now, years later, Jordan found that those initials matched a name mentioned in one of her mother's old journals, Elijah Carrington. And according to Harris, he'd been involved in multiple missing persons investigations decades ago, none of which were ever solved. Jordan didn't know what to make of it yet, but she was starting to understand the horrifying scope of what she had stepped into. This wasn't just about a boy's confession or a single act of violence. It was about a web of trauma and secrets stretching back for years, possibly even generations, woven through lives, relationships, and systems meant to protect people like her and her brother. And now that web was tightening. People were vanishing. Evidence was disappearing. And she was running out of places to turn. The only certainty left was this: she was no longer looking for truth. She was fighting to survive it. And just when she thought she couldn't be more shaken, when she believed she had seen the darkest part of this case, a message pinged her inbox from an encrypted account. It read, "Melissa was just the beginning. Keep digging and you're next." Jordan's blood went cold. Whoever was behind this wasn't done. And the game they were playing? It had only just begun. Jordan sat frozen in her apartment, staring at the flickering screen of her laptop. The encrypted message threatening her had barely finished loading before another ping echoed through her inbox. This time, the sender used a name she hadn't seen in years, Tessa Monroe. Her jaw clenched. Tessa had been her childhood babysitter, a teenager back then, someone she had looked up to, someone who always brought a sense of safety into that volatile, chaotic house. But she had moved away suddenly without saying goodbye, and her family never talked about her again. Jordan assumed it was just one more relationship buried under the dysfunction. But here her name was now, years later, attached to a file titled simply, "You're wrong about him." With trembling hands, Jordan clicked the file open. What she found was not at all what she expected. It wasn't a confession or a threat, it was a video. Grainy, time-stamped, clearly recorded from an old camcorder. In the footage, Jordan saw a younger version of herself sitting at the kitchen table coloring. Off-camera voices filled the room, her mother, her brother, and someone else, someone familiar, yet whose tone chilled her to her core. The conversation was casual at first, until Jordan's mother suddenly said something horrifying. "He thinks it was his fault. That's the only way it'll stick. Let him keep believing it." Jordan's heart dropped as the camera shifted, revealing her mother looking directly into the lens with a cold, calculated expression. "We need someone to take the fall, and no one's going to question a scared little boy." Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed about her brother's sudden confession, his broken mental state, his inability to explain what really happened, began to collapse. This wasn't just a boy overwhelmed by guilt or trauma. This was manipulation. A setup. A mother turning her own son into a shield to protect someone or something else. Jordan rewatched the footage again and again, trying to pick apart the details. The date of the recording matched the exact day her brother had walked into the police station years ago, hands trembling, voice shaking, insisting he had done something terrible. And now it was painfully clear he had been told to.
Coerced. Coached. But why?
And for whom? Jordan sat frozen in her apartment, staring at the flickering screen of her laptop. The encrypted message threatening her had barely finished loading before another ping echoed through her inbox. This time, the sender used a name she hadn't seen in years, Tessa Monroe. Her jaw clenched. Tessa had been her childhood babysitter, a teenager back then, someone she had looked up to, someone who always brought a sense of safety into that volatile, chaotic house. But she had moved away suddenly without saying goodbye, and her family never talked about her again. Jordan assumed it was just one more relationship buried under the dysfunction. But here her name was now, years later, attached to a file titled simply, "You're wrong about him." With trembling hands, Jordan clicked the file open. What she found was not at all what she expected. It wasn't a confession or a threat, it was a video. Grainy, time-stamped, clearly recorded from an old camcorder. In the footage, Jordan saw a younger version of herself sitting at the kitchen table coloring. Off-camera voices filled the room, her mother, her brother, and someone else, someone familiar, yet whose tone chilled her to her core. The conversation was casual at first, until Jordan's mother suddenly said something horrifying. "He thinks it was his fault. That's the only way it'll stick. Let him keep believing it." Jordan's heart dropped as the camera shifted, revealing her mother looking directly into the lens with a cold, calculated expression. "We need someone to take the fall, and no one's going to question a scared little boy." Everything she thought she knew, everything she believed about her brother's sudden confession, his broken mental state, his inability to explain what really happened, began to collapse. This wasn't just a boy overwhelmed by guilt or trauma. This was manipulation. A setup. A mother turning her own son into a shield to protect someone or something else. Jordan rewatched the footage again and again, trying to pick apart the details. The date of the recording matched the exact day her brother had walked into the police station years ago, hands trembling, voice shaking, insisting he had done something terrible. And now it was painfully clear he had been told to.
Coerced. Coached. But why?
And for whom? Before she could process it further, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Sergeant Harris. When she answered, his voice sounded different, strained, tired, almost reluctant.
We need to talk.
Face to face. There's something I haven't told you. He asked her to meet at a diner on the edge of town, a spot known for being quiet and out of the way. As she arrived, Jordan could feel her nerves unraveling. When Harris slid into the booth across from her, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. After a long pause, he finally said, "You're not going to like this, but I was the one who took the original confession from your brother. And that footage you just saw? I've known about it for years." Jordan's mouth went dry. Harris confessed that the video had been buried, never submitted into evidence, never mentioned in the case file. He claimed he had been ordered by his superior at the time to suppress it, told that Jordan's family had connections that extended far beyond their small town. Political ties. Financial leverage. The kind of power that makes inconvenient truths disappear. Harris had stayed silent out of fear of losing his job, fear of being blackballed, or worse. But he said the look in Jordan's eyes over the last few days had made him realize the cost of his silence. And then came the real shocker. According to Harris, the real reason the confession had been pushed forward so quickly was because a second person had come in that same night, someone whose name had been redacted from every official record. Harris only referred to him as Mr. K, a man who arrived with an attorney before the boy even finished speaking. Mr. K wasn't family. He wasn't police. But he had authority. Enough to walk in, talk to the captain privately, and walk out again with a file under his arm. Jordan had never heard that name before, but something about it made her stomach churn. It didn't make sense. Why would someone with no connection to her family be involved in a child's confession? Harris leaned in then, his voice low. "I didn't believe it either. But Mr. K was at your house the night before the incident. I saw his name logged in a visitor report during a completely different investigation. You were never supposed to know. No one was." It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, yet suddenly shifted the entire picture. What if her mother's manipulation wasn't just for her own protection? What if her brother was covering not for a parent or a relative, but for someone more dangerous? Someone outside the family, but close enough to have power over them. And why would Tessa Monroe have that tape? Why did she come back into the picture now? Was she a savior, or another player in this twisted game? Just as Jordan tried to ask Harris more, his phone lit up with a message that drained the color from his face. He showed it to her silently. It read, "You've said enough." She's not ready for the rest. Beneath the message was a single, haunting image, a childhood photo of Jordan, standing outside the very attic where her brother used to hide. Jordan's world cracked open again. Someone wasn't just watching. They had been watching all along. And whoever was pulling the strings. They weren't finished yet. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier as Jordan drove through the empty backroads leading to the house she never wanted to see again, the home where all of this had started. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, and every passing mile seemed to pull her deeper into something she couldn't undo. But the choice had already been made. After Harris revealed the truth about Mr. K and the buried footage, after the photo of her younger self appeared in that anonymous message, Jordan knew she couldn't run anymore. This wasn't just about her brother's fate, it was about hers, too. And if she didn't face it head-on, whatever power had been circling her life for years would finally close in. But what she hadn't expected, what made the entire drive feel like a weight pressing against her chest, was that the confrontation waiting for her wouldn't be with some shadowy figure or hidden puppet master. It would be with her own father. He hadn't been part of her life for years, disappeared when she was barely a teenager, buried under the chaos their mother created. But as the pieces fell into place, she started seeing a pattern, a name that kept reappearing in background files and property records tied to shell corporations. Her father hadn't vanished. He had simply stepped out of sight, shielded, perhaps even recruited, by the same people tied to this twisted mystery. When she found a digital breadcrumb connecting his name to an old account linked with Elijah Carrington's former group, her stomach turned. Her entire childhood had been built on lies, and now, here she was, about to knock on the door of a man she wasn't sure she could trust. He opened the door before she could even raise her hand to knock, as if he'd been expecting her all along. His face was older, gaunt, but not surprised. Not even remorseful. Just tired. As they sat across from each other at a table that hadn't changed since she was a child, the silence between them became unbearable. Then he spoke, not with an apology or an explanation, but with an ultimatum. "You need to stop this," he said calmly. "There are people involved you don't understand, and if you keep pushing, they'll make you choose. You think you're searching for the truth, but what you'll find could destroy what's left of your family." Jordan's heart pounded. It wasn't the warning that broke her. It was the look in his eyes. He wasn't trying to scare her. He was mourning her already, as if he knew there was no safe way out of this. When she asked him outright about Mr. K, he didn't deny knowing him. In fact, he called him by his full name, Kenneth Vale, a man with ties to elite religious groups, corporate finance, and a string of unsolved cases buried so deep in legal red tape they might as well not exist. "He helped us," her father said. "When your mother started losing control, when the rituals got too far, he offered protection. But there was a price." The price, as Jordan quickly understood, was silence. A silence that demanded her brother's sacrifice. A silence that demanded her own erasure from the record. Her father had known. Not just about the cover-up, but about everything. The manipulation, the coercion, the staged confession. He hadn't just stood by. He had helped make it happen. Her stomach twisted with rage, betrayal, confusion. And then he made the offer that shattered her. "I can protect you," he said, sliding a plain manila envelope across the table. "Walk away now. Don't speak to Harris again. Don't contact anyone. There's a place for you to disappear. Start fresh. But if you keep digging, you'll be alone. And you'll never be safe again." Before she could process it further, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Sergeant Harris. When she answered, his voice sounded different, strained, tired, almost reluctant. "We need to talk. Face to face. There's something I haven't told you." He asked her to meet at a diner on the edge of town, a spot known for being quiet and out of the way. As she arrived, Jordan could feel her nerves unraveling. When Harris slid into the booth across from her, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. After a long pause, he finally said, "You're not going to like this, but I was the one who took the original confession from your brother. And that footage you just saw? I've known about it for years." Jordan's mouth went dry. Harris confessed that the video had been buried, never submitted into evidence, never mentioned in the case file. He claimed he had been ordered by his superior at the time to suppress it, told that Jordan's family had connections that extended far beyond their small town. Political ties. Financial leverage. The kind of power that makes inconvenient truths disappear. Harris had stayed silent out of fear of losing his job, fear of being blackballed, or worse. But he said the look in Jordan's eyes over the last few days had made him realize the cost of his silence. And then came the real shocker. According to Harris, the real reason the confession had been pushed forward so quickly was because a second person had come in that same night, someone whose name had been redacted from every official record. Harris only referred to him as Mr. K, a man who arrived with an attorney before the boy even finished speaking. Mr. K wasn't family. He wasn't police. But he had authority. Enough to walk in, talk to the captain privately, and walk out again with a file under his arm. Jordan had never heard that name before, but something about it made her stomach churn. It didn't make sense. Why would someone with no connection to her family be involved in a child's confession? Harris leaned in then, his voice low. "I didn't believe it either. But Mr. K was at your house the night before the incident. I saw his name logged in a visitor report during a completely different investigation. You were never supposed to know. No one was." It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, yet suddenly shifted the entire picture. What if her mother's manipulation wasn't just for her own protection? What if her brother was covering not for a parent or a relative, but for someone more dangerous? Someone outside the family, but close enough to have power over them. And why would Tessa Monroe have that tape? Why did she come back into the picture now? Was she a savior, or another player in this twisted game? Just as Jordan tried to ask Harris more, his phone lit up with a message that drained the color from his face. He showed it to her silently. It read, "You've said enough. She's not ready for the rest." Beneath the message was a single, haunting image, a childhood photo of Jordan, standing outside the very attic where her brother used to hide. Jordan's world cracked open again. Someone wasn't just watching. They had been watching all along. And whoever was pulling the strings. They weren't finished yet. Inside the envelope were new IDs, a passport,
Cash.
instructions, all laid out like a twisted care package for a daughter he had long abandoned. Jordan felt the tears coming but forced them back. This wasn't grief. It was fury. She had come here for the truth, not to vanish. But as she looked across at the man who had helped orchestrate her brother's nightmare, she realized just how far this network reached. If her father, the man who once read her bedtime stories and taught her how to ride a bike, could be bought into silence, who else was compromised? Who else she trusted might already be working against her? Leaving that house felt like walking off a cliff. The wind hit her like a slap, and her heart ached with the weight of the decision. She could take the envelope, disappear, and live with the unanswered questions. Or she could burn it all. Every relationship, every last bit of security, and fight for the truth alone.
But there was no middle ground.
That illusion was gone now. The people she was up against didn't deal in mercy. That night, as she sat in her car trying to breathe through the storm of emotion, her phone buzzed again. A new video had been sent. No sender, no subject. She opened it, hands trembling. The clip was short, grainy like the others. But this one showed a place she recognized immediately, the attic of her childhood home. The camera angle was low, shaky, as if it had been placed by a child. And in the frame was her brother, maybe 6 or 7, holding a toy camera and whispering into it. She said, "They'll come for me if I tell. But I don't care. I'm gonna tell Jordan." Then the screen went black. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. That recording had never been shown to investigators. Never mentioned. Her brother had tried to reach out, years ago, and someone had buried his message. Now she knew the truth wasn't just buried, it was taken. And whoever had been silencing them for all these years wasn't finished yet. 2 of 2. You said. The wind tore through the broken trees like it had a purpose, like it knew something was unraveling fast and wanted to be there to witness it. Jordan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the flash drive that had just changed everything. It was handed to her hours earlier by a trembling journalist who met her behind a laundromat 3 counties over, a man who used to work crime beats for a local news station before suddenly disappearing off the air 2 years ago. He said her name in a whisper like it was dangerous to speak it out loud, and he looked over his shoulder every 5 seconds as if someone was tracking his every breath. "I was warned," he said, his voice broken, "but your brother, he tried to get to me. Before it happened. Before the confession. They scrubbed it all. But I saved this one copy. You need to see it. But once you do, don't trust anyone." The footage on the drive wasn't just damning, it was explosive. It wasn't just Elijah's coerced confession or the manipulated recordings from the basement room. It was a montage of footage, clipped together from years of surveillance across multiple families, children being taken into custody under questionable circumstances, identical confession patterns, and every one of them tied to the same nonprofit organization, the Northbridge Youth Initiative. A foundation that was supposed to protect vulnerable minors, offering therapy, shelter, and rehabilitation. But behind closed doors, they were running something else. Something monstrous. And worse, there were names on the board of directors Jordan recognized. A sitting congresswoman. A former child psychologist who testified against Elijah. Even the sheriff from their county was listed on an internal memo marked confidential, with the signature of Kenneth Vale at the bottom. The horror of it crashed over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't about her brother anymore. It wasn't about her family. It was a network, organized, protected, and deeply embedded in public systems. Children were being targeted, silenced, and reshaped into scapegoats to protect people in power. And the ones trying to stop it? They either vanished or were discredited forever. Suddenly, all the contradictions in Elijah's story, all the gaps and inconsistencies, made perfect, devastating sense. She pulled over, heart pounding, and switched to an encrypted app he'd once told her about. A single message pinged back instantly, but it wasn't from him. It was from his number, but the tone, the phrasing, it wasn't right. Just 5 words. Stop now. Before it's worse. Her pulse raced. That wasn't a warning, it was a threat. He had tried to speak out, and they'd buried him with a lie. And they weren't done yet. Jordan tried to call Harris. No answer. Again. Then a third time. Voicemail. She slammed the laptop shut and glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to catch the glint of a car's headlights turning off behind her. No engine, no sound, just silence. Her stomach sank. She was being followed. Panic surged as she sped off, weaving through winding back roads, her mind racing even faster than the engine. Who could she trust now? Harris was either compromised or already gone. The journalist who'd given her the drive had said he was leaving the state that night. If I make it that far, he'd added under his breath. But the biggest blow, the moment everything collapsed beneath her feet, came when she called her childhood friend Rachel, the only person outside the family who ever truly believed Elijah's innocence. Rachel answered, calm, composed, even sweet. But the longer they spoke, the more Jordan felt the shift. Rachel wasn't surprised by the footage. She wasn't confused by the names. In fact, she wasn't alarmed at all. I always told you to let the past go, Rachel said softly. But you just couldn't. And now look where you are. Jordan's mouth went dry. You knew. I warned you, Rachel continued, voice cold now. You think you're chasing justice, but you're not. You're just digging up what was meant to stay buried. I'm sorry, Jordan.
I really am.
But you brought this on yourself. The line went dead. And just like that, everything cracked open. Rachel had always been close with the sheriff's wife. In hindsight, she'd been the one who pushed Jordan away from asking too many questions back when Elijah's case went to trial. She was the one who claimed that Elijah was unstable, even when no one else saw signs of it. The betrayal wasn't just painful, it was terrifying. If Rachel had been involved from the beginning, Jordan had been feeding her every step, every discovery. The people she was running from didn't need to follow her. They were already 10 steps ahead. The sky darkened fast, the storm returning like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Jordan drove with no clear direction, the GPS dark, her phone powered off, trying to remember the locations Elijah used to talk about in code. If he'd left any breadcrumb, any safe house, any ally not yet compromised, now was the time to find them. But deep down, she knew this wasn't going to end with her simply finding a haven or cracking the conspiracy wide open. This was bigger than anything she had imagined. And she was running out of places to hide, people to trust, and time to make her next move. What she didn't know yet was that someone else, someone she thought long gone, was about to make a move of their own. And when they did, it would force Jordan to make an impossible choice that could either expose everything or destroy what was left of her brother's truth forever.
You said.
The final confrontation didn't come in a courtroom or even under the glow of camera lights like Jordan once imagined. It came in a place that felt far more haunting, an abandoned church on the outskirts of Denton County, its steeple cracked and leaning, its windows boarded shut as if it were hiding secrets too twisted for daylight. She didn't choose the location. It was given to her in an encrypted message hours after she uploaded a fragment of the Northbridge footage to a secure drive, a bluff to pressure whoever was behind this. She knew she wouldn't get a second chance. And she knew going there meant walking directly into the lion's den. But she had one last card left, the unedited footage her brother had secretly recorded the night before his confession, never meant for anyone but her. Inside the church, the air was suffocating, thick with decay and a bitter tang of mold. Candles flickered along the back pews, like someone had been waiting for a long time. Jordan clutched the flash drive tight, her other hand wrapped around the small recording device she'd used to capture her father's confession days ago, admissions of fear, complicity, and his part in covering up the events that set her family's destruction in motion. Every piece of the puzzle had clicked into place over the last 48 hours. Northbridge wasn't just a corrupt nonprofit. It was the storefront for an elite reconditioning program for minors labeled as emotionally disturbed, used as a front to launder abuse, power, and silence. Elijah hadn't been the only victim, but he had been the only one to fight back, and for that, they made him their example. A voice called out from the shadows.
Come.
Familiar. Chilling. I always knew you'd come here, said Kenneth Vale, stepping from behind the altar like a ghost out of memory. The man who'd once been their town's golden psychologist, now nothing more than a puppet master with blood on his hands. You're brave, Jordan. Reckless, but brave. Just like your mother. The name hit like a blade, but she held her ground. She tried to stop you, didn't she? That's why you ruined her. You made her out to be unstable. And when she fought back, you went after Elijah. Vale smiled, not with arrogance, but pity. Your mother didn't fight back. She joined us. She was part of it from the beginning. You still don't see it, do you? Jordan's chest seized. The walls felt like they were closing in. She volunteered Elijah, he continued. Thought it was the only way to fix him. She believed in what we were doing until the day she found the files you now carry. And when she tried to run, we let her think she escaped until it was too late. Your brother didn't murder her. She ended her own life after we gave her just enough of the truth to make her lose her mind. The weight of the lie shattered everything Jordan thought she knew. Her whole mission had been built on the belief that her mother had been the only sane person in the storm. Now she saw the deeper horror. Her mother had helped build the machine that eventually devoured them all. But Jordan wasn't here for closure. She was here to expose every dark corner Vale had worked so hard to hide. I uploaded the footage, she said, voice shaking but steady, to multiple servers. If I don't walk out of here tonight, everything goes public. All of it. Northbridge, the confession patterns, your peril trails. The news cycle is already watching. You can't silence this anymore. Vale stepped forward slowly, revealing a pistol in his hand. Sleek, matte black, clinical. You think I came here to kill you? No. I came here to make you choose. You destroy the original files now, and your brother walks. We'll pin it on someone else, fake a new suspect, make it look like a government cover-up if we have to. But if that footage leaks, he dies in custody. An accident. Maybe a fight. And this all vanishes with him. Jordan's stomach dropped. The same impossible choice, now in its final form. Her brother's life or the truth. Either she saved him and let the system continue, or she burned it all to the ground and lost him forever. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket. Not for the flash drive, but for the second device she'd brought. About power. But the twist came not from him, but from the officer who stayed behind. A woman Jordan didn't recognize at first glance. You're safe now, she said, lowering her weapon. But there's something you need to see. From her coat, she produced a manila envelope. Inside was a single photo, taken from a surveillance camera weeks ago. Elijah, in the detention center, receiving a visit. The visitor? Rachel. The pistol came up fast, but the door behind them burst open faster. Two figures stormed inside. U.S. Marshals, tipped off by a whistleblower Jordan never named. She didn't need to. The journalist had survived and followed through. Within seconds, Vale was disarmed, restrained, and dragged from the church as he screamed about misinterpretations, about context, the truth about Northbridge live. Jordan hadn't just uploaded the footage. She had made sure thousands of people were already watching the final moments unfold in real time. It was all out there, Vale's confession, the choices, the threats. It couldn't be undone now. His face twisted, the calm cracking as realization set in. You little. The one broadcasting everything live on a hidden YouTube channel, already trending under the title. The photo was timestamped 3 days before Jordan had spoken to her on the phone, before the betrayal, before everything spiraled. Which meant Rachel had never left Elijah alone. She'd been orchestrating something far deeper than Jordan realized, possibly protecting him from the inside. Your brother was never the target, the officer said quietly. He was the bait. And just like that, the entire truth fractured once again. Because this wasn't just the end of one conspiracy. It was the beginning of another, and someone else had already picked up the pieces Jordan thought she destroyed. It was weeks before Jordan finally stood outside the state facility where Elijah was being held, breathing in the cool morning air as though it were the first time she'd truly tasted freedom. Not for herself, but for the brother she'd fought so relentlessly to save. The investigation into Northbridge had exploded across national media platforms, dominating YouTube trending topics, Reddit true crime forums, and Twitter spaces alike. Public outrage was swift and unforgiving. Multiple officials were indicted, and nearly a dozen former employees came forward with chilling stories that only further validated everything Jordan had risked her life to uncover. But the road to justice, as she quickly learned, wasn't a straight line. It twisted, buckled, and demanded more than the truth. It demanded pain, sacrifice, and the kind of relentless courage that very few people ever find within themselves. And yet, she'd found it. Not because she was brave, but because she'd run out of any other choice. Elijah's release didn't come with a ceremony or apology. It came in silence, just as the nightmare had begun. He walked through the facility gates in a gray hoodie, thinner than before but eyes still alert, still watching. The two of them embraced, without speaking a word. There was too much pain to untangle in one moment, too many scars that wouldn't show on the outside. But for the first time since their mother's death, there was hope between them. A shared understanding that they'd survived something no one should have to face, and that somehow they were still standing. Jordan didn't ask him what happened during those dark months inside. She didn't press for details about what he remembered, what he felt, or whether he truly knew how close he'd come to disappearing forever. All she cared about was that he was finally free. Not just from prison, but from the crushing weight of secrets he was never meant to carry alone. The media frenzy died down slowly, replaced by the next scandal, the next crime that would trend on YouTube Shorts or make the front page of true crime documentaries. But something had changed. Jordan had become a voice people listened to, a reluctant advocate for justice reform and mental health support, especially for vulnerable youth trapped in systems designed to break them. She never wanted fame, but she used the platform anyway, uploading one final video to her channel, a raw, unedited reflection that stripped away all the polish and sensationalism. She talked about the cost of the truth, the pain of betrayal, and how justice, when it finally comes, rarely feels like victory. That video didn't go viral, but it resonated. People listened. Survivors came forward. And for the first time, she felt like maybe the nightmare had meant something more than just pain. Still, not every question had answers. Kenneth Vale's trial was delayed repeatedly, and though he remained behind bars, rumors swirled online that he was bargaining with investigators, offering names, bank records, classified files in exchange for leniency. The true scope of Northbridge's operation remained unclear, with several suspected donors and affiliates yet to be named. And then there was Rachel. Her sudden reappearance at the center of the conspiracy left a trail of questions Jordan couldn't quite chase down. She'd vanished after the photo surfaced. No phone calls, no texts, no explanations. Just gone, like a ghost slipping through the cracks of a story that refused to be neatly tied up. Some nights, Jordan wondered whether Rachel had been a pawn, a protector, or something else entirely. But the truth was, she might never know. And maybe that was the point. Because some stories don't end with closure, they end with clarity. And for Jordan, clarity came not from answers, but from the strength it took to keep asking the right questions, even when everyone told her to stop. Her life didn't go back to normal. It never could. But she found a new kind of normal. One where she and Elijah lived quietly in a small town upstate, away from the noise, the headlines, the memories. He painted. She wrote. And together, they built something that looked a lot like peace. Not perfect. Not simple, but real. On the final night of fall, Jordan stood by the lake behind their cabin, watching the wind ripple the surface. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the last copy of the flash drive, the one she'd kept, just in case the world ever needed reminding. Without hesitation, she threw it into the water and watched it sink below the dark surface. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she finally didn't have to remember it all alone. And just as she turned to head back inside, a soft buzz echoed from her phone. A notification. One word. Soon. No sender. No context. Just a reminder that some shadows don't fade. They wait.